Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining the Behind Company Lines podcast. Today we have Zeb Anderson, co-founder and CEO of LegalQ. LegalQ removes the pain of finding an attorney with an app that connects users to attorneys on demand via voice, video, or chat for a free consultation. Zeb, so excited to chat with you. I'm always excited to chat with founders who worked in a particular industry for a certain amount of time and then create this amazing product that's really challenging or innovating or even just creating a new point of access for a user base. And, we really love to get into the weeds of how you conceived the idea and where you are now. But before we get into all that good stuff, what were you doing before you started LegalQ?
Yeah, and Julian, thank you so much for the awesome intro. Appreciate you and looking forward to this.
Yeah.
Before LegalQ, lifelong developer, love to do web apps and just kind of get my feet wet with that. Had a startup in like '09 around location-based couponing apps when like location-based everything was sexy, right? And it
Yeah.
was fun to do. Um, we we had a little exit, nothing crazy on that. But then afterwards, I wanted more punishment, so I went to law school and became a lawyer. I love conflict resolution, right? Like, how do you get people into a room and not have them hate each other at the end of a litigation or just trying to solve something? And got the tools from that, and then after law school, went to work at a big med tech company called Medtronic, and they do, or my roles there were started in compliance, right? It's kind of like half IT nerd stuff, half legal. And then I did internal audit, which was cool because I got to learn about, everything from like order to cash, procure to pay, like all these like enterprise kind of processes and operations. Vastly different than a startup, right? But also same principles apply, just bigger scale, which is
Yeah.
cool. And then second to final, I guess, role was I led an analytics team for channel management and corporate strategy. Saw a bunch of cool ways to do that globally and just trying to give people access to therapies at a simpler way. And then I did some like developer relations kind of roles as well. So that's pre-LegalQ.
Yeah. It's incredible. I love founders and chatting with founders who've worked at larger companies and really seen the internal mechanics. I think it brings, maybe a level of maturity to their startup. And I'm curious in terms of your experience, at Medtronic, learning the inner workings of a large and successful organization. What were they doing right that maybe has influenced how you built or think about when you are building LegalQ and structuring your company? Is there anything that you took away that they did well or didn't do well that you're kind of using for that experience now?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think a couple things they did well was, so first off, everybody that joins Medtronic has basically like drinks the Kool-Aid a little bit on this thing called the mission, which is literally like kind of like different tenets that apply to the success of the company, written by the old CEO like 50 years ago. And you literally like get a medallion. So like, it's a little cheesy on some things, but people actually do like appreciate it. Right. And it's like, look to that as kind of like the constitution of like, what is the culture of the company, and use that to kind of define buy-in and like success of like how to do that effectively. And I think just having that kind of touch point of like, everybody's behind this one mission, right? In moving the ball forward is kind of nice to kind of drive culture and positive impact from that lens. So I think that from a culture lens was a really cool way to do it.
Yeah.
They also do a good job of just making sure that, at least from like the angles that I've looked at it, from like a technical standpoint, it's a massive 100,000 person company. And so like they have to have these pretty enterprise grade ERP systems and, focusing everything together. Behind the scenes, I had to maybe be surprised or not surprised, but a lot of it's still duct tape, right? Getting like this data to get to this system and in everything in between. So like, you don't be afraid of that as a startup, right? Because like, it's still, even as a $30 billion revenue company, fighting some of those same battles. And obviously you want to minimize the amount of tech debt you have, like the amount of legacy systems that cause pain down the road. But at the same point, if it takes some duct tape to get the product to the right person at the right time, like use the damn duct tape. So I think that's helpful.
Yeah, they use duct tape on the Apollo 12, so it must be doing something right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a miracle product.
Yeah. But besides, obviously, the product is different. But what is, I guess, in your eyes, what's different about your previous startup from now, and what are the lessons you learned that you think maybe impact what you're doing now at LegalQ?
Yeah, it's another good question. I think the biggest difference was probably kind of my maturity in the product phases and different elements to that. I still didn't get it right, by the way, with LegalQ, because I overbuilt way too much. And, we had, I don't know, damn near 30% of the product overbuilt, right? But with the first startup, Yappa, basically, we didn't have any customer feedback from the start. We just kind of, put our finger in the air, like, the world needs a location-based couponing app, so let's build it. And then we forgot to ask the customers or, either side of the market. And I guess I have a flaw in that both of my startups are dual-sided marketplaces, which are very, very painful.
Yeah.
But I think just the maturity on the product side to know, like, you do need that customer feedback early. And if you don't get that right away, you are going to be, unless you're Steve Jobs, at the whim of literally just doing it wrong. And you got to rebuild and move back and forth. And that's a painful process too. So I think just learning a little bit more to trust that the people you're going to sell to are the ultimate people that should help define the characteristics of that product.
Yeah. And what are the conversations like when you're, I run a company which is a T-sided marketplace as well. And we oftentimes, I think, should be asking more questions. So from what you've learned, what are the conversations you're having with both sides of the marketplace? And when do you define is the right time to have those conversations? Is it at certain periods or is it all the time? What's that conversation like?
Yeah. I love that question because we're still working through that, to got it. The best practices. I think the earlier you get it, I mean, you need to have some concept, right? Like this is, we want to help attorneys find a simpler way to get connected to people. Because it's 2022, it shouldn't be this hard. We have this fun thing called the internet that can help this process, And then on the user side, like it sucks to try to figure out which attorney to talk to, right? Like if you're in a new city or you just don't have a lawyer friend to refer you to somebody, like it's a painful process today to try to Google it. You're on hold for half of them. And then like maybe the first one sucks. So you got to go with a different one, right? And that's just a bad process too. So, you can start from that pain point and then it helps if you give them some direction, right? Like we're thinking of a technical solution. Like here's the wireframe of a web app that we're thinking about implementing for this. Would this be helpful? Where do you see the pain points? So I think giving them enough of like a flavor of the problem set and the people that are directly affected by that, but also giving them a starting point, right? Blank sheet of paper is great, but at the same point that can get you some pretty divergent answers that you just don't need and you're wasting time with. So if you can give them the semblance of a structure first, then they can say like, I like this flow, or I like the fact that I can talk to them after 3 screens, or, like it's maybe 1 screen too many or something.
Yeah.
Then it gives them kind of a touch point that they can build on the thing that you have. And hopefully your first instincts were close enough that you can build on that to get them to ultimately what they want.
Yeah.
Is that aligned to like what you guys use?
No. Yeah. Yes. So you would build a process and then we have maybe a hypothesis. Then we go through like a polling system because we hold our community in Telegram. And we can build on that community. And those polling questions kind of help guide, okay, what would be helpful? What would not be helpful? And the degree to what it would actually be impactful. Obviously, if it hits a certain threshold, then we have to at least go down the rabbit hole and start building it out, which has led us to, do a lot of very specific improvements, but micro improvements that I think have compounded on themselves, which is sounds easy, but it's probably the hardest thing to do.
Yeah. I feel you.
Going back to your background, you mentioned that in the notes before the show that there was something particularly interesting about going through an accelerator. You've been through a few accelerators, and what was, I guess, the benefits of going through that as a founder and building out this product versus if you didn't go through it? And I'm assuming, in your first startup, you just kind of went in full bore into it. But what were the benefits about going through an accelerator, and what would be your advice to startups who are thinking about it?
Yeah. You learn a lot, right? So we did actually technically 3 of them. So the first one is called Beta MN. It's like a non-dilutive, you don't give them equity kind of company or accelerator that just kind of get your feet wet, learn some of the fundamentals of company building. Like you just kind of have these like micro sessions of different topic areas, which was helpful. And I think it really helped us kind of think about the areas that we were probably lacking in those different spaces. But you didn't really have like a productive kind of raise point at the end of that, right? It was more of a company building, learning how to do it well. And then we did Techstars, which is much more formal, a lot more rigor around kind of their processes on everything. It was a hybrid program. So it was 2 weeks in Iowa. That's where the program was at. And then we did remote, and then we did another week there for the demo day. And so it's a lot of kind of in the weeds company building stuff, right? Like there's a week called Mentor Madness, which is literally like 100 some different mentors, like speed dating through like all these different questions. So like at the end of this damn thing, you're like, I know my business value prop by heart, right?
Yeah.
And so like it's cool on that. They do a good job of keeping you accountable to like OKRs, KPIs. Like you have a weekly call, check in with the rest of the cohort, who is, by the way, awesome. Like every company there was super supportive, super kind. Like I still have a Slack channel with a lot of them, and we just trade helpful advice when we can, and they're supportive. And so I think from that lens, like it is really helpful. They give you 100K in a convertible, and then 20K grant, so you can use that to extend your runway a little bit. And then basically at the end, you have your demo day, which is, hopefully kind of the catalyst to get your raise process started. But we didn't raise at the outset of it. A lot of that was we kind of had a product shift about halfway through. So that's a little bit of tricky to, get the engineering to the point where it should be good enough to do it. And our traction wasn't there at that time either, to be fair. So, but you make a lot of great connections with that. And then the third one we did this spring was the Launch Accelerator. This is Jason Calacanis's. He's the This Week in Startups guy, amongst other stuff. And they are a lot more focused on just like the raise process. So every week you have your cohort of 7 companies, and you basically do a pitch in front of 10 to 15 VCs, angels, syndicates, and you have like a 3-minute pitch and then 2-minute Q&A session. And so basically kind of similar to like the Techstars Mentor Madness, where you just like beat you get the processes into you. It's by the end of it, like you can literally do it blindfolded. And it's a really good way to just meet a bunch of VCs, get your network built out, and it sets you up for a pretty good chance for raise at the end of it.
Incredible. And just focusing on LegalQ and kind of the inspiration for the idea, what was the inspiration or the catalyst that you felt needed, to connect people with resources? And just to be fair, we've had a lot of guests on the show who have two-sided marketplace connecting to different users that particularly, are made to be connected, but in a lot of ways, there's so many barriers to actually getting access. And we had the founder of ZocDoc on here, and he was facing a similar issue with just like balancing out the two-sided marketplace. But back to it, what was the catalyst to the idea? And then what are the interesting or exciting parts about building a two-sided marketplace?
Yeah, love that. So I think the initial catalyst was when I was at Medtronic. Like a lot of my job was to try to see how we can go directly from Medtronic to the end user, or the hospital. and cut out the middlemen, right? Because all these middlemen were just taking their chunk,
Yeah.
and it's literally like causing people to lose access to life-saving therapies, right? Like if you have to increase the product by 20,000%, like that pacemaker is now maybe out of reach for some people. And so like literally people are dying. And so pretty important thing, right? To try to find a more efficient way to get people connected in a simple way. And, I had the legal training, the background, and I started seeing other areas where it's just too hard today to find these connection points. And I think from an access to justice standpoint, right? It's, 2/3 of Americans have an ongoing legal issue at any given time. Literally 2/3 of all Americans at any given time in the
Wow.
last 4 years. And like in
That's
California
huge.
alone, it's insane,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
In California alone, 85% of legal circumstances are never fully resolved. So like you have this complex system that nobody truly understands, tons of regulatory capture, tons of bullshit. And truly the middlemen are kind of inhibiting access to justice along that path.
Mhm.
And so, started thinking through what does that look like to make that process simpler. And so obviously apps, control most of my life, millennials, millennial. And it's just an easier way to do this, right? Like you could basically, if you give people the tools to be successful in that complex system, I forget who said it, but like a big VC once said, like, if you want the best successful startups, like pick an industry that has a super low NPS score,
Yeah.
and that's highly regulated, and then just like do anything small at that and you'll be a success, right?
Yeah.
Because it's such a frustrating process today. Legal is almost by definition just like this cumbersome process to get through. But if you could take a piece of that and make it available and accessible to people, you can start the conversation of like, how do we make this whole system a little bit more efficient? And if attorneys are paying, 25% less for their customer acquisition costs, over time, they can pass that along to the customers themselves. And so, that's kind of my hope, is to like take some of that, froth in the system today, cut out the middlemen, and hopefully the end user can have that same access that patient had at Medtronic to that pacemaker, through legal help.
Yeah.
Mixing metaphors a little bit, but
Sure,
that's the
sure.
goal for it.
Yeah.
And sorry.
No, continue, please.
I think the question about the dual-sided marketplace as a whole, like what things have surprised me is just I should have seen it coming because I am a lawyer, but like it's so hard to sell to lawyers, right? Like they literally are the most risk-averse group of humans on the planet, and rightfully so, right? Like you want your lawyer to be like, here's the things to do to minimize risk.
Yeah.
And then to try to sell them, left of the adoption curve of, hey, this is a new product, check this out. It's a simpler way to do this. Like you truly need like market education. You need to show some proof points. You need to have word of mouth, and then over time, once they get accustomed to that, then you can start, getting over that hump on the adoption curve a little bit more. But I underestimated how hard it is to sell to attorneys.
Yeah.
I think is my biggest learning point.
Yeah. Well, what's been like, we talk about one founder literally today said, so I'll try not to use the word, but he's like, challenges or problems stressed up. Is there any problems that have been particularly difficult around building, whether it's the product in particular or in just startups in general, that either, the pollution took longer than you expected, or it was, you had to find a different avenue to maybe move past or around that problem?
Oh man, how much time do you got? It's so like everything is some flavor of a problem. And to be honest, like doing a startup, like you can't sugarcoat it. Like it sucks. A lot of the times it's like fighting an uphill battle on an untested product in an untested marketplace that you have to literally convince the world that you have built a better mousetrap for a cheaper price, right? Like that alone is why 97% of startups fail after 2 or 3 years, I think. But that aside, like if you are still crazy enough to try it and still, have the belief in the ultimate mission, right? Which just goes back to why that's important. of what you're doing is actually going to be impactful to the level that you can fight through those battles, like a little choked up, like it's legitimately the thing that will see you through.
Yeah.
And so I think from everything from engineering challenges, right? Because I think over the course of 3 years at LegalQ, we've had 3.5 kind of main development sources, and everybody has their own way to do it. Everybody hates the last way that's the last person did it. It's so, just all those challenges that add to the timelines of things. You have your just operations challenges, right? Like if you can get someone to the top of the funnel, what's the next step to get them, mid funnel? What's the next step to get them onboarded? What's the next step to keep them happy on a customer success side? And so each one of those is a brand new process. Like it's a brand new way of building out those, and they're going to fail along the way. And so then you got to figure out, where in those processes do you have the bandwidth to put time and effort into resolving, because you have to have them all. But at the same point, it's going to break. And then just some, the funding is always a challenge, right? Like I don't think LegalQ is like we've raised about $600K, I think so far. And I don't think we've ever had more than like 3 or 4 months of actual runway, before you're at death's door. So, just that constant challenge of like needing to get to the next standpoint. And then the pieces that are challenging about that is if you don't have the capacity to have kind of the strategic vision, right? You're always going to be at the mercy of these tactical decisions along the way to put a Band-Aid on it, to fix it, to get it to that next stage. And everything I said earlier about duct tape or Band-Aids or whatever you want to use, like is true, and you got to use those. But at some point you need a structural process to say like, what is the actual strategic way we should think about this? And if you don't have the funding to have the kind of breathing room to, try and fail on that, it adds up to the challenge.
Yeah. Speaking about, LegalQ right now and where you are, tell us a little bit about the traction. How many users are using it? How many attorneys are now, available to and lawyers are available to get access to? What areas are you in? What are you seeing month to month growth wise? Give us some of the numbers that are you find are exciting.
Yeah. So throughout the whole kind of beta process and up to today, we've had 7,500 downloads on iOS and Android from a user side, ranging from, and this is again, back to the mission, like if you want to get motivated, like you read some of these questions that people have for these attorneys, and like, obviously I'll be confidential because I'm, really, that's a core belief of mine, but they're heartbreaking. Some of them are just soul crushing. And, these are people with actual legal and sometimes life or death problems on, this platform. And to that end, like we have to take every single one of these so seriously. And you can't minimize, like we're not selling socks, right? If someone misses a payment on someone doesn't get their shipment of socks, like it sucks, but you're going to be okay. Like if somebody misses a court date, they could literally go to jail, And so it's that kind of onus on us to do right by those customers. And so on the attorney side, I don't have the exact number. All in, we're probably about 120 attorneys across all the different areas of law and the different platforms. We have basically tried to realign those to specific categories of law and jurisdictions. As what we've learned along the way is that if you're too kind of scattershot with your approach, like the CACs are too high, because then, if you have to do performance marketing for this niche kind of area in this small town for this area of law, you're not going to be able to get your LTV to justify, what you have to charge for that. So we've learned to kind of centralize those a little bit more on specific states and areas of law. And that's helped a lot on the CAC side to bring that down and ultimately get the attorney a cheaper price for what they pay us.
Yeah. How do you balance, like, a lot of founders, when I chat with them, the big concept of mental health comes up, because not only is it, a challenge to always have to solve problems every day, but also when you're dealing with, I'm sure, a little bit more of a heavier interaction with your user base. How are you do you find ways to mitigate the, overall effects or the heaviness that comes with the decisions you have to make or the priority that you have to have. I'm sure that there's something that you can't address right away, but you will, but they
Yeah.
might still kind of stay resonant in your mind. How do you kind of manage that mental health process?
Yeah, I love this question. Thanks for asking. Like, it's truly like one of the things I'm passionate about of late because I struggle with it. Truly, like I have been the past 3 months depressed quite a few times, and it sucks, and you just have to find out what your triggers are and like how to enable you to kind of stay healthier throughout these processes. And a lot of this is do as I say, not as I do, to be honest. But I think ultimately what I found to be helpful is just consistent, therapy is clutch. To that extent as a leader, right? Like I used to kind of hide behind it, like an out of office thing on my calendar or something. But now I'm like, no, I'm going to therapy. Like this is important. Like
Yeah.
everybody else do the same because it's impactful, right? And everybody struggles and everybody has down days. And especially when, to your point, like the heaviness of the material that you're interacting with is really hard to internalize, let alone, customers telling all day long, VCs telling all day long, like there's a lot to handle that you don't have like a buffer to internalize that and like say, I'm a failure versus this, system of raising money is a failure. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so
Right.
I think just helping to get to the place where you can, offload some of that stress to a therapist is helpful, or a beers with buddies, or whatever that looks like, friends, to just take some of that stress off it and get outside of the bubble, like get outside of the startup. It's like, it reminds me a lot of like school where I was a terrible student. So like at the end of the day, I would like always have this dread of like the homework that I didn't do throughout the day, like kind of hanging over me. So like, even if I, was out, hanging out with friends or something, like I would still have that kind of dread of like, oh shit, I got to go do my homework, at the end of this thing. Like if that's what your process is for a startup too, at the end of the day, you can't get out of that from that just hanging over you. So, find your time box times when you're at work and you're diligent and you're doing it really well. And then find your time box times to just not think about it for a minute, get out of it, get out of your space and just do something different. And I think that really helps compartmentalize kind of those different work-life balance, if you want to call it that, issues.
Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate you sharing that. And I love the transparency behind it. And especially I've chatted with some founders who develop products around mental health. And they repeatedly say it's the consistency of you being conscious of where you are, and also the consistent practice that really kind of mitigates a lot of the reactional stress or reactional kind of feelings that we have that may or may not be true or may or not be as heavy or as detrimental sometimes as we may perceive them. So it's often to see that you continue that practice. More focused on LegalQ. What are some of the biggest challenges that you face today?
Yeah. And thanks for making that light. I appreciate that a lot. And not a lot of, it's honestly not talked about enough. And I really appreciate you bringing that to light, man. So thank you.
Of course.
On the challenges side, I think the biggest right now is just it's this kind of chicken or the egg thing that we have of like how much revenue we have that's going to drive like what the kind of KPIs that the VCs are looking for to get to that next level of our raise. And then just like one drives the other, but then you kind of have to have like a little bit of both at the same time to make it happen in the order it should. And it's the other part of it is just, knowing what's enough on a product side to be, and I've probably not done a great job of this, to be honest. Early was like, I think I, overbuilt a little bit too much and then kind of had to walk it back and then re-examine like how much of the product we should build for this version to get to the customers that can pay us to like keep driving that growth. And I think just knowing when it's good enough, right? Like it gets the job done. You're always going to see all the scars and the warts behind the scenes of the product itself, but it's there's value in it,
Yeah.
and I think if anybody is kind of struggling with that, just launch it and then fix it along the way. Especially your early adopters,
Yeah.
they're going to be a lot more patient with you, and and in some ways it's a good thing, right? Because then they feel like your customers have ownership of part of the product, right? Like they have, helped define, some of these aspects of it that are maybe not as helpful or broken. And just, I think using that is there's something human about getting that buy-in
Yeah.
with the thing that you're using is helpful. So
Yeah.
those are probably two challenges today.
Yeah. Long term, if everything goes well, what's the long term vision for LegalQ?
Yeah. This is the exciting part. We literally have the ability to get everybody on the planet globally access to justice. So there's two things with that. One is 73% of the globe uses a civil law system, which is different from like the common law system that is started like in England and the Commonwealth countries, and the US has it. It's basically you have to use judicial law from back in time, stare decisis, to say, here's the big messy rule of law. Does this case apply? Does this case apply? How does legislation apply? It's messy. Civil law systems basically say everything under the sun has a rule, right? Like here's a big book of rules from Napoleonic law, from Roman law back in the day. So everything is, here's Julian's situation legally. Here's the area that applies to it. It's a one-to-one match, right? And so one of the things we're doing at LegalQ is, if you think about it, these users are asking these legal questions based on the jurisdiction, based on the category, and the attorneys are answering them in, the best way they can by the category and by these areas of law. And so over time, what that's creating is the corpus for machine learning, an AI algorithm to say, hey, the last 5,000 times this question's been asked in California, here's the best answer to it, right? And so now the attorneys look like a genius because they're able to quickly and effectively give the best answer to that. But even further in the future, we can turn that into an API, license that to Google, and say, hey, everybody that has legal questions now has access to that on demand. So, hopefully we can truly help drive access to justice in a simple way and just make an impact on the people that need access to simple legal help and hopefully kick off that process.
Incredible. I love that. And I always like to ask this question, one for selfish research, but also for my audience as well. Whether it's early in your career or now, what books or people have influenced you the most?
Yeah, I love the question. I'm going to look over at the bookshelf. So I think from a business standpoint, I think I'm going to give you two of them, and then selfishly a couple others. So 0 to 1 is seminal. Like in my mind, it's just easy to say like it's almost like this brutalist way of thinking about business, right? Like all the cruft aside, like Peter Thiel is very like, this is the facts of life if you want to start a business, right? Like get all that fluffy shit out of here. Like this is what you got to do to be successful. And I mean, this is coming from somebody that's definitely loves culture and defining like, how do we kumbaya, all this stuff. And sometimes you need that kind of just brutally honest, like here's what you do to be successful. And I think those are some of the good ways to do that along the way. Another book I've recommended recently is called The Mom Test. Have you read that one?
No, I haven't.
No, it's basically a book that helps you, for what we were talking about earlier, like ask intelligent questions about your product, your business in a way that elicits productive feedback, right? Because the premise is like, you ask your mom like what she thinks about something. She's like, oh babe, this is awesome. I love it. It's the best thing you've ever done. It's so good. But that's not helpful feedback, right? Like you need to say like, hey, what are some qualifications to this problem set, that actually you can elicit helpful feedback and grow your product through that way. So those are two I really recommended. And honestly, I love fantasy books. Like Tolkien, Sanderson, like all the old school ones, and just it helps you just escape, get out of
Yeah.
your own head for a little bit. Helps you think about some fun, scary things in the future. And like, it's just, I think that's really important too.
Incredible. Zeb, I know we're coming close to the end of the episode, and I really appreciate you taking the time to dive into your background, your experience, the challenges that you face now, and all the lessons you've learned and all the information that you find inspirational. But last little bit is I always like to give my guests a chance to give us your plugs. Where can we find you? Where can we support? Where can we be part of the mission and the vision of LegalQ? What's your website, your LinkedIn, your Twitters? Where can we be a part of you and your journey?
Uh, Julian, you're a great host. I truly enjoyed this so much, and I really appreciate that. Yeah, if you want to check out LegalQ, if you're either an attorney or somebody that needs legal help, you can check us out at legalq.io. I don't remember our exact socials, so you just search for LegalQ and you'll find it on them. We didn't get the good ones. Somebody just took them like 10 years ago. But yeah, we're on a mission to just help people find a simple way to get answers to their legal questions. And then on the attorney side, we just want a simpler way to find potential clients. And we think that we do a pretty good job at both, and we'd love to have you. So thank you.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, I hope you enjoy yourself. And Zeb, thank you again for being on the show.
Thank you, Julian. This was great.
Awesome.